Hey, here is Roberto Varese at the GFCC. I'm really happy to have here today our member from Canada. Laurie Schmidt is the CEO of Go Productivity, our GFCC member and board member of the GFCC from Canada. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have a conversation with you today.
Laurie, we are getting ready for the GFCC meeting in Saudi Arabia, and we'll be talking about infrastructure. Yeah, and I know that Go Productivity has an agenda related to infrastructure in the context of Canada. So, what is the case for investments in infrastructure in Canada at this moment, Laurie?
Well, the case is that Canada has a little bit of an infrastructure deficit in that we're probably a little bit behind in both keeping up with infrastructure investment as well as looking for new sustainable approaches to infrastructure in Canada. And so, really, it starts with the basic foundational pieces around electricity, water, pipeline, as well as transportation components. But the investment really is looking at, are there new innovative approaches to these? And really what we've started to look at is that it's a real theme around collaboration. How do we bring government procurement policies together with investors, together with academia, together with industry to look at how to be very efficient in the upgrading of our infrastructure projects and potential new types of sustainable infrastructure, as well as how can we be cost effective in those investments when you're dealing with very challenging economic times.
Yeah, well, when you say that Canada has a relative deficit in infrastructure, are there any particular areas that you would highlight in relation to that?
I think certainly the new government has started to highlight that in transportation infrastructure is probably the biggest area. And then there's the challenge of how do we look at sustainable approaches, whether that's, high efficient, high speed train types of systems, whether it's moving products to market in more efficient ways, and, really being cognizant of our carbon footprint in the same time. So how do we, as a huge exporter, how do we look at better efficiencies, cost efficiencies, and sustainable development in transportation?
You also mentioned, let's say, innovation and this whole idea of connecting different players. What are the opportunities that you see to connect investments in infrastructure and the promotion of innovation and the promotion of the development of the talent pool today in the Canadian context?
One of the things we're trying to do is we work with academic institutions is to really focus on, the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But even within the academia, it tends to be siloed approaches. And so one of the things we've tried to do is look at how do we pull those disciplines together, along with industry and along with government, to look at new approaches and adding in a creativity and innovative approach to some, normally kind of siloed disciplines, and look at a combined approach to bringing new technologies, especially to tackle infrastructure, both opportunities and issues and challenges that we face. That's something a little bit different than has been done before. Typically, government policy and industry kind of have done their own approaches to this, and now what we're trying to do is take a full collaborative approach with the whole value chain.
Yeah. Could you maybe mention what you are doing in that space? So maybe some of the initiatives
Sure.
that you have.
So, Canada's been very good at looking at leading practices, both, here and around the globe, to tackling some of these challenges. One of the biggest ones that we've identified, particularly in Alberta, but in Canada, is how do we be more efficient with our resource industries? So looking at some of the major extraction industries, and are there ways of being more efficient? As these projects got more complex and larger, We saw that risk allocation and a lack of communication up and down the value chain was creating some considerable, especially cost and time challenges. So what we've been able to do is pull together a group of industry leaders, the project owners, but including the whole value chain, to say, is there an opportunity for us to collaborate and do these projects differently? Not just looking at processes, certainly starting with processes, but also saying, are there existing technologies out there that we can begin to adapt? Everything from, scheduling software, which each, component up and down the value chain may be doing something different and cannot communicate with each other, to types of things like nanotechnologies that could be utilized, robotics that could be utilized, and different extraction methodologies that could be utilized, and realizing that through that, that there could be, tremendous efficiencies and probably value into mining sectors, around the world. If we're going to remain competitive within the investment opportunities around the world for energy plays, Alberta's recognized that they have to be more efficient and really focus on sustainable infrastructure development as well. So the approach is engaging academia, associations, government, and industry, looking at the leading practices that are there, breaking down the projects into working groups and trying out pilots with the whole value chain in doing these projects differently. And then republicizing some of the benefits, some of the outcomes, and some of the breakthroughs and technologies that comes from that.
And is that what you call PADI, the Project Alignment and Delivery Initiative?
That's right. It's called the Project Alignment and Delivery, affectionately known as PAD. And it's really meant to facilitate change within the project delivery, in Alberta. It's guided by industry leaders representing the whole value network. And the whole goal is to improve the performance of these projects in the energy sector. And as I mentioned, with a real holistic approach and addressing sustainability challenges as well.
How does it work in practice, Lori? So what do? Do you convene meetings with experts from different organizations, company and academia to analyze big infrastructure projects? And so how do you make that happen?
Yeah, so the front end of the work was actually to do that, to bring academia, government, and business together to say, what are the biggest challenges? Where are the critical components that are impacting these issues? We've gone through that, and we have a whole inventory of that work and statistical work. The next step was to then convey a group of these industry leaders, and it's from the major energy players, not just here, but around the world, significant leaders that can make decisions and drive improvements throughout the projects. And as we did that, then we identified who else in the value chain should we have at the table. So engineering procurement firms to contractors, right through to labor, and bringing everyone together at the beginning of a project to say, how do we plan this better? How do we look at existing leading practices? What's everyone's role in this? How do we look at a win-win organization? And so it's impacting everything, even to how we do contracts. So looking at new processes like IPD, integrated project design and delivery. So new ways of doing contracting, new ways of agreeing on the whole front-end planning right from the beginning, new communication technologies. And so we've broken down components into key working groups, one around skills and capabilities are required to really drive this, one around the front-end planning, and one around risk allocation. So how do we have shared risk and reward in this project? Taking a component of the project and doing them differently with everyone at the table. So the group meets probably 4 times a year as a full group called the Founders, but the pilot projects are ongoing. And as we find a gap or a challenge, then we seek back out to the academic world to say, do you have some leading practices in this area that would assist us working through these complications?
How do you do that? Do you do project by project, or do you work with a portfolio of infrastructure projects?
Actually, we're doing it with a portfolio of infrastructure projects, so a range of them, and which is great because we can compare the progress and outcomes from a number of different applications.
Could you mention maybe some of the projects that are types of projects that are included in that portfolio?
Sure. So the main one is some energy projects in Fort McMurray called the Fort Hills Project, which is a major extraction project going on. So those are longer term projects, as you can imagine. They're multi-year projects. So as we're able to break down components and measure the success of those, we can take that on to a next phase of a project. One of them is looking at a bridge type infrastructure, and another one is looking at pipeline development. And that's a really great opportunity to look at new technologies, even nanotechnologies, new types of coatings, ways of pipeline integrity that's really, really critical as we go forward.
That's great. A final question. We talked a bit about, let's say, projects and breaking them down and identifying challenge risks and go and look for technologies that could contribute to a more sustainable and a solution that would be better performing in the field. Right. Do you work also with, let's say, financial tools or funding tools that should be in place or should be engineered to make those things happen?
We have started to look at that, and I think if I'm understanding you correctly, it's around cost analysis and
cost
financial
analysis, investment,
yes,
risk
absolutely.
mitigation.
Absolutely, and that's built into every project because we want to be able to measure both cost efficiencies, but and time efficiencies and best utilization of skills and labor. So all of those are being measured. I should say too that we're building a network of other expertise around the world, and again, organizations like GFCC help accomplish that so well by creating an environment where you can connect to other leading, thought leaders around the world on some of this information. And so we're always looking for ways to tap into the leading thinkers wherever they might be in the world.
I think that's a great opportunity and we would be happy to work with you when exploring that, Lori. Yeah. And yeah.
That would be wonderful. Now, I think, within the next few months, we're going to have some data to start to talk about and some of these approaches and some of these projects. And that's a great way to engage a larger conversation about the trends that we're seeing, the gaps that we're seeing, and more opportunities for global cooperation.
Okay. Lori, thank you so much for your time. I think this is a great example of things that can be really done to improve reality, and we're really happy to have your insights.
Thank you, Roberto.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.